So a few years ago, I was lying on the couch watching raindrops drip off the roof past the living room window, and I had an idea. What if... So I filmed the raindrops for a bit, divided the video frame up into vertical columns, assigned a different musical note to each one, and created a new MIDI note each time a raindrop hit the bottom. The end result became the start of the interlude on my last album. It was such a fresh and unpredictable way to create music, which got me thinking, what else in nature can I try this out with? So my plan has two parts. First, go out and find new ways that I can use nature to help me create music, and second, use those new ideas to make a song. So let's do it. Okay, so I have this time lapse that I shot of the stars moving across the sky, and my idea is basically to put a vertical piano on the side of the screen so that whenever a star crosses a certain key, it triggers that note.
So instead of a piano, I just drew out a column of boxes and lined that up on the side of the time lapse. To keep things simple, I assigned each box to a note in the C major scale and then repeated them so there were 4 octaves worth of notes. So, for example, whenever a star enters this box, it will trigger a C. Or when one enters this box, it will trigger a G. Then I went through and for each note marked any time that a star entered that box. And depending on the size of the star, I used a different color to mark it, which would allow me to add some dynamics later. Basically, the bigger the star was, the louder the note that it would trigger. Once I finished marking all the stars for a box, I entered the timestamp and color of each one into a spreadsheet. And then I repeated that for each box until I had the data for all of them. Next up, I opened up Logic and started converting the spreadsheet data into MIDI notes. I had a different track for each row in the spreadsheet, and I went through creating a new note for each cell. So I would take the timestamp in the cell, enter it into Logic to move the playhead to that time, create a new note and drag it to the playhead, and then adjust the velocity of that note depending on the color of the cell. Once I had done that for all 28 rows, it was time to give it a listen.
So I have Logic's harp plugin loaded up, and here's what it sounds like with just one note. And here's the full thing, and again, the notes are assigned to 4 octaves worth of the C major scale. So yeah, could use a little bit of work.
I changed the sound from the harp to a much quicker kind of beep-boopy synth so that the notes didn't blend together as much. I also added some reverb to help give it a more outer spacey kind of sound. And then I adjusted the actual notes so that instead of using every note in the scale, I was only using the notes in a certain chord. So I changed the key and used a B-flat major 9 chord, which uses the notes B-flat, D, F, A, and C, and spread those out across 6 octaves. I also color-coded the tracks based on what note it was, and then panned the tracks around a bit to give it some spread so that the notes didn't sound so clumped together.
And here's the finished result. Nice! So with the stars bit down, the next step was to start writing a song that could incorporate it and that I could build upon with more nature elements. I had a few rough ideas for another song that I was in the very early stages of writing. And I decided I would just try to combine the two. So I basically put the stars on a loop and sat there with a guitar while I figured out all the chords and a structure for the song. And once I had the chords and structure fully fleshed out, the next step was to lay down the main rhythm section instruments. So with the foundation of the song now in place, it's time to add some more nature elements. And our first stop is going to be the beach.
Okay, so I'm at the beach, and the idea here is basically I want to fly the drone up in the air, get a nice aerial shot above the waves, and then use sort of the in and out flow of the waves to control the volume of something within the song.
So here's the shot that I got.
For each wave, I marked down the timestamps of both the start point, so when you can see the wave just start to form, and the peak of the break just before the white bit starts to really spread out. I made a new track in the song and recorded a simple synth pad part to accent the chords and add a bit of texture to the song.
Then I used the timestamp data I had gathered to automate two parameters on the track, the volume and the frequency threshold of a low-pass filter. And a low-pass filter essentially removes all of the frequencies above a certain threshold. So if I used one on my voice right now, it would sound like this, and as you raise the frequency threshold back up, the higher frequencies start to come back in and the sound becomes more clear.
So between the start of each wave and the peak of its break, I automated both of those parameters to increase on the synth pad track and then had them go back down until the start of the next wave.
And here's how it turned out. Next, I wanted to add some lead parts to the song. I had been using satellite view on Google Maps to find a good beach to use for the waves shot, and while doing that I had noticed something else nearby that gave me a cool idea for modulating a lead instrument, but getting the shot for it turned out to be a little bit sketchy.
Okay, so over here there's a bunch of reeds and kind of a marshy area. In the marsh, there's a lot of sort of rivers winding their way through the reeds, and I want to try to get the drone up there so I can get a nice aerial shot of those rivers and then use those to have something wobble in the music.
So long story short, I didn't have a lot of room to work with for the drone takeoff. I moved this branch out of the way to clear a nice vertical path for it, but immediately upon leaving the ground, the little guy decides to make a hard left turn, flying directly into the nearest possible obstacle and snapping two of its propellers in half. With the drone out of commission for the day, I decided my next best option was to climb this nearby tree and try to get an aerial view of the river from there. It was a nice view, but not quite the overhead angle I was looking for. At this point I realized I could just use the Google satellite image.
I was hesitant at first because that kind of felt like cheating, but ultimately it's still a real picture of something in nature, so here's the shot.
To start, I sketched out a graph and then oriented the picture so that the river could make up the points on the graph. So the x-axis represents time, and in this case I have a section of the song I want to put a lead part over that's 13 seconds long. So I divided the x-axis into 13 chunks and then each of those into 4 chunks. So each little tick represents a quarter of a second. So I'm going to put some effects on the lead part, and the y-axis will dictate the level of intensity for those effects. So the higher the river goes along the y-axis, the more prominent the effect will be, and vice versa. I plotted out the points along the river and then entered that data into a spreadsheet.
So this is going to sound a little dumb at first, but it actually turned out pretty cool. I started by recording myself singing a single note and holding it out. Then I added some pitch automation so it kind of goes up the scale. Then I added the effects that were going to be adjusted based on the plot points on the river graph. So the three things I'm going to be adjusting are tremolo, the vocal formant, and the pan position. So tremolo is an effect where the volume kind of wobbles up and down. And you can adjust how fast or slow that it's wobbling. So in our case, the higher the point is on the graph, the faster the rate of the tremolo will be. The vocal formant is kind of tricky to explain, and this is not at all a technical definition, but basically, if you hear a voice that's been pitched up,
and it kind of sounds like a chipmunk, the formant is what gives it that chipmunk quality.
Or for a voice that's been pitched down,
It kind of sounds like a monster. The formant is the monster quality of the sound.
it's different than the actual musical note that's being adjusted. It's kind of just the frequency quality of the sound. So depending on where the point is on the graph, I will raise or lower the formant. And panning is when you move a sound to the left or the right, and you can move it just a little bit to the side, or you can move it all the way to the side. So the higher the point is on the graph, the further to the side I'll pan the note. So I took the data from the spreadsheet and entered it as automation points on the vocal track, and here's what it sounds like. To To fill out the sound, I added a few more layers, so a sort of gently distorted duplicate version panned to the other side, a harmony track that was playing some different notes, and a duplicate version that was pitched an octave down. And so I copied the automation points from the first track onto all of those, so all 4 tracks were adjusting those same 3 parameters in unison depending on the plot points on the river graph. And so here's the whole thing together with the rest of the song so far. The next step was to add vocals, and I've written a few songs with vocals before, but for the most part, all the music I've made up until this point has been instrumental. I think I've been kind of scared of maybe ruining a song with bad vocals, but obviously vocals can add a lot to a song, and I think it's kind of the next step for me as a songwriter to just go for it and try to get more comfortable singing and writing lyrics. So once I had the lyrics written, the next step was to record the vocals.
Knots in the thread, tugging at my hazy head, solid core waiting for some room to breathe.
Oh, hey, what's up? Welcome to the studio. Come on in, I'll give you a tour. Here it is. We got the microphone here, got it covered up with a buff. There's a little pop filter. And then down here we got the meat and potatoes of the setup, the studio rig. So we got the audio interface here that the microphone is running into, which runs into the computer. Everything gets recorded in there and then comes back out through the headphones that go on my head. And yeah, I'm in the closet because there's lots of clothes in here, obviously, that dampen the sound, which gives you a nice clean recording to work with. And yeah, I'm gonna get back to work. So I'll just leave you here. Right there, yeah. All right, see ya. Gonna go record some nice vocals.
Just let him be. Just let him be.
So with the vocals recorded and the song really starting to come together, I just had a couple more ideas for nature elements that I wanted to try out.
All right, so this next idea is a bit of a stretch because I'm not totally sure if the thing that I'm thinking of is even there anymore, but we're gonna go check it out anyway. Okay, so the last time I was at this conservation area was about 2 years ago, and there's a big pond in the middle, and the pond was totally frozen, except there's a beaver lodge right in the middle. And leading up to the beaver lodge on both sides was basically a trail that the beavers had made through the ice. So hopefully, if that is still there, I can get some aerial footage of it and then use kind of the windiness of the river to dictate something in the music. Okay, so there's the beaver lodge right there, and leading up to it you can see kind of here a little bit of the trail. It's a little bit hard to see from this angle. I think what I gotta do is just fly the drone and hopefully get some good footage of it.
Okay, so I went through the drone footage and I pulled out this frame, and so you can see we've got the river going through the ice, which I'm assuming is from the beavers going to and from their lodge. I really like how the vocal formant modulation sounded on the effect I did with the other river, but I want to try it on some of the actual lyrics. So I have this vocal part in the second verse that sounds like this.
All I know is just what I don't, yeah.
I repeat the same line a few times, and I think it would sound really cool to have the formant shifting around as that line is repeating.
So once again, I made a grid, lined it up with the river, and plotted out the points along the river. Then I entered the data into a spreadsheet and used that data to automate the formant going up and down on the vocal track.
And I really like how it turned out, so here's that full section.
All I know is just what I don't get. All I know is just what
there were a lot of ideas for nature elements that I had that just didn't make it into the song for one reason or another. Some of them just didn't sound good. Even with the sounds that did make it into the video, there was a lot of trying different things out to make it work, especially with this last one.
So I have this clip from the same pond as the last section, and it's right at the edge of the pond where there's a little stream flowing into it. So you can see the water sort of blorping around as it flows under the ice. So after trying out a bunch of different stuff with this clip, I came up with the idea to use it in the outro of the song and basically try to have the song sound like it's coming from underneath the ice. But whenever the water blips up like that in the clip, have the sound become more clear as if it's coming up to the surface.
So here's a basic EQ adjustment window in Logic. If I raise the volume of the low-end frequencies, it sounds like this. Raising the high-end frequencies sounds like this. I can also raise the volume at a specific frequency, and I can adjust the width of that peak, which changes the range of frequencies that are being raised. And I can slide it up and down the frequency spectrum so that different frequencies are being affected. So the idea is to have these peaks pop up and move left to right, kind of mirroring the water blobs in our clip.
So the blobs are moving pretty quick, and I've learned from the other nature bits that if the effect is changing from one point to the next too quickly, it can be pretty hard to actually hear the difference.
So the first thing I did was slow the clip down to 1/3 of the original speed. I pulled out a section that was the length of the outro, zoomed in and rotated the clip so that the blobs moved more or less horizontally across the screen, and then...
You are not going to believe this. I made a graph.
On the graph, the x-axis represents the frequency spectrum, with the low end on the left and the high end on the right. The y-axis represents the volume of the frequency peaks. I'm also going to track the width of each bubble when it's at its tallest, which will determine the width of the corresponding frequency peak. So I made a spreadsheet, and for each water blob tracked the timestamp and x-axis position where it started, the timestamp x and y-axis positions as well as the width when it was at its peak, and the timestamp and x-axis position where it ends. To keep things simple, I made the y-axis value 0 at the beginning and end of each blob, so each frequency peak will kind of just fade in and then fade out. Since there are often multiple blobs on the graph at the same time, I separated the spreadsheet into 3 colors, which would correspond to 3 separate EQ adjustment windows in Logic. Next, I put all of the tracks during the outro onto a bus so that I could automate them all together. I didn't include the stars or the waves so that those would both play throughout the outro without being affected. Then I put a low-pass filter on the bus, which cuts off all the high frequencies and muffles the sound, kind of as if it was underneath the ice. I also added a bit of tremolo to give it more of a wonky, watery kind of sound. Then I just went through the spreadsheet and converted all of the data into automation points on the bus.
And so here's the finished result.
Alright, so that about does it. If you want to hear the full song, head on down to the description. And otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.